So today I'll be discussing hydrogen sulfide, H2S. It's a very toxic gas that even in low levels can be deadly. Um, what are we going to be discussing today? How does it come to be? How is H2S formed? How are you likely to be exposed to it? So common exposure methods, exposure levels, and times that you have at those levels, and remedies and cautions. Just general comments. So, going into it, how does it come to be? Hydrogen sulfide is a compound of two hydrogens and one sulfur. So, any chemical reaction containing hydrogen and sulfur can produce it. Now, it is typically a low oxygen compound, in that if oxygen is present, the two hydrogens will go to the oxygen and produce water, H2O. But if the oxygen is low and the two compounds come together instead of using oxygen, H2S can be found. It's a gas, and it is the known as the rotten egg smell. It's known for the rotten egg smell that you get with marshes, because marshes have water and mud that separate oxygen and air from these chemical reactions, decomposition. You got bacteria consuming organic material and producing compounds. Well, with the water and mud keeping the air out of the equation, you don't have the oxygen to produce water. It'll just produce H2S. Well, likewise, it can be produced in oil. When it goes down to that level and you're cooking the organic materials, well, if there's not enough oxygen down there, or if there's something separating the oxygen or something taking the oxygen more prevalently, you will produce H2S. And it'll stay down there as part of the oil and not go anywhere until we drill it up or move it around. So, going into that, H2S main way of coming into contact is through air. It's a gas. You breathe it. It is more dense than air and will sink. So if you have storage tanks, ditches, holes in the ground, a pothole, it'll stay there until acted upon. So fans, vents, the wind, if it's shallow enough. If you get a deep enough tank, even in open air, it's going to stay in the bottom. So, as such, beings, it can be produced when the oil is being cooked in the ground. You can hit sour patches of crude, and it's laced with H2S. And this will be brought to the floor either when you're producing oil, or just drilling for it. So any bits, pipe, anything that comes in contact with this crude can vent off H2S for an amount of time. Any cutting boxes or cutting fluids will also contain it. That's why part of the oil recirculation, the fluid recirculation process on drilling rigs has degasifiers to separate H2S out of the fluid. Going into exposure levels, most likely thing to trigger something's wrong is your eyes aggravated. Now, some people it's been reported at 5 parts per million, and it can go as high as 100 parts per million. But most commonly, it's in that 50 parts per million level, and it'll aggravate the eyes, and they'll tear up, and similar to tear gas, it just aggravates your eyes. Well, in that 50 parts per million, you also get a feeling of being sick, kind of nauseous, headache, just discomfort. Now, at 20 parts per million, you get an uncomfortable feeling, like a very slight illness, but that's kind of easy to miss, as a lot of us may be dealing with things at the house, at coming off of a bug, something we ate, didn't like it, or we're running late on lunch, so we're running on low blood sugar, and that's causing the same feeling. But generally, at 50 parts per million, you know something's wrong. Now at 200 parts per million, that's when things get really, really bad. There's no questioning it. Your eyes are aggravated, your stomach's upset, you have a bad headache, you're nauseated, you're not really comfortable working. You're trying to get out of there, hopefully. Well, that leads us into fatal levels. 600 parts per million, which in the grand scheme of things is, see, 0.006 of a percent in air. So barely measurable by normal percentages. It has to go to parts per million. In 30 minutes, it's fatal. It's in that air, in that environment for 30 minutes, and you're a goner. You're down, you're out. Well, you go up 200 parts per million to 800 parts per million or greater. It's considered instantly fatal. By the time you breathe it in, you're gone. There's no help. And as I mentioned, that's not even a tenth of a percent. That's 0.08 of a percent. Very small dosages in very quick time. But if you're not at that level and you figure something else is wrong, the general best way to handle it is get to fresh air. Get to fresh air where you know that there's not the possibility, and you can come around. It generally also advised to get medical personnel involved just in case there is something severe. Even at 200 parts per million, you feel sick. It's not fatal unless you're out there for an hour or so, but some major damage can be had. Even at 50 parts per million, you can have some damage over a long period of time. So best to contact the medic around or have somebody check you out, even if it's just first aid. Now, getting into general cautions. As with 800 parts per million, it's instantly fatal. You breathe it, you go down, it's fatal. If you're working in a multi-man team in a tank, in a hole or something like that, a bowl, like the room makes a natural settling area, you can have an individual go down, and then his buddy sees him go down, and he tries to save him, and he goes down. The third guy sees two guys go down, and instead of thinking about it, tries to go save the other two. It's a chain reaction called the domino effect. It's common enough in confined space entry teams. It's discussed. You don't want to go down to the domino effect. And a lot of it has to do with H2S, because H2S will settle in these tanks and stay in them. So that's part of the reason why you test and vent for it. And that concludes my presentation. There's a general rule: you don't mess with this. There's no common use for it as far as cleaning applications, or it's not like something that you handle within these levels. This stuff you just don't handle. So that's all I have for today.